Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to support Senate Bill 1738, the Protect Our Children Act of 2008.
And I think one of the greatest challenges in public safety, and a growing challenge, is keeping young people safe on the internet.
And so the legislation I'm going to be signing today is a very important law, a leading law, where Illinois is leading the way for other states to protect children.
We've gotta all save the children.
Welcome to the Enemy of the Surveillance State, where we discuss news, tips, and open source tools to help you protect your privacy in an age of mass digital surveillance. I am your host, C. Mitchell Shaw, and joining me this week is special guest Joe Wolverton, constitutional lawyer, writer at the New American Magazine, and host of the popular Teacher of Liberty YouTube channel. We'll be discussing the Earn It Act and how it is an attack on encryption, how the surveillance hawks always package their anti-privacy bills, the U.S. Constitution, and more this week on Enemy of the Surveillance State. Okay, so that sound montage at the beginning began with Florida Congresswoman and former DNC chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Then we had then New York Attorney General Andrew Cuomo, and following finally was then 2010 Illinois Governor Pat Quinn. And they were doing what statists do, wrapping bad legislation in the packaging of "we have to save the children." That song that played at the end of that, or through it and then raised the volume at the end, was the 1973 hit Save the Children by Motown group The Intruders. Given the name of the group and the sappiness of the song, it just really seemed appropriate for an episode about surveillance hawks pushing a bill to effectively do away with encryption in the name of saving the children. So before we get into this week's discussion, let me say that Enemy of the Surveillance State is listener-supported. I made a decision early on not to take on advertisers, and no one underwrites the show. This is a one-man show, and I chose for it to be listener-supported because if I recommend a piece of software to you, if I recommend a piece of hardware to you, I want you as a listener to know that I'm recommending that because I would use it and I believe in it, not because somebody with a deep pocketbook is paying me to tell you that. So if you're interested in supporting the show, pop over to my Patreon page. There'll be a link in the show notes, and just sign up as a patron. I've got perks for patrons. I also have launched a line of merchandise, t-shirts, hoodies, stickers, and coffee mugs so that you can purchase those to show your pride as an enemy of the surveillance state and help support the show so it can grow and keep providing excellent content to help you protect your privacy in an age of mass digital surveillance. So now with the housekeeping stuff out of the way and all that crass bill-paying stuff, we are joined today, as I said, by constitutional lawyer, writer, and popular YouTuber Joe Wolverton. Joe, thanks for taking the time to join us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Just say hello to the folks and tell us a little bit about yourself, and make sure to talk a little bit about your YouTube channel so that folks know where to find that and what it's all about.
All right. Thanks, Mitch. I'm so grateful for you to have me on. And more than that, I'm just grateful that you have this show to help highlight these things that are so important right now. So let's see. I am from, Memphis, Tennessee originally. I grew up in Europe because my dad's job working for the government. Went to BYU for my undergrad and then went to law school back home in Memphis. And I've been writing for the New American since 2004. I practiced as a constitutional lawyer for several years in Nashville. I did mostly suing government for having violated the Fourth Amendment. That's kind of where I spent most of my time as a lawyer, and doing writing. And then, so eventually the writing turned into speaking, and I did that. And the speaking turned into teaching, and I taught at university for a couple of years, and I've taught at a high school, and I am now just a tutor. I just go around teaching people who want to learn about the things that I teach about that no one seems to be teaching about anymore. And that led me to the YouTube. So I created a YouTube channel, Teacher of Liberty, and I load stories up there that have kind of look at current events, but through the lens of history. And these are lenses that just have been, that the status and the government have tried to crush throughout the years. And so people are hearing these stories for the first time. And when they hear them, they realize why the federal government purposefully removed these things from the curriculum of schools. And so that's what I do now. I pretty much do the YouTube thing, and I go around teaching mostly homeschool kids in large groups these lessons that I teach about the philosophical roots of the American founding.
Awesome. Man, I knew that you were a rock star. I just didn't know you were that big of a rock star, so that's pretty awesome.
Well, someone's got to.
Well, it's hard to be us, but somebody has to do it, right?
Exactly.
So, one of the really neat things about hosting a show like this is that you get to really just wear your humility on your sleeve, right? So you recently wrote for The New American about this Earn It Act. I'll put a link in the show notes to that article for the listeners. And what struck me really right off the bat when I first looked at the Earn It Act was that, as per usual, we again see a really bad piece of legislation wrapped in the packaging as something to, quote, save the children, end quote. Because at the end of the day, statists, both in and outside, inside and outside the surveillance state, really only seem to have two kinds of wrapping paper that they wrap up these bills in. The one is, we've got to fight those terrorists. And then the other is, we have to do something to save the children, okay? So the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, has been all over this since the beginning. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to what the EFF has had to write about this. And if you're not familiar with the EFF, folks, the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is an organization dedicated to preserving digital rights, including digital liberty, coders' rights, fair use, those types of things. If you think about the types of liberties that would be sort of specific to the electronic frontier of the internet, because, of course, they were formed when we were still using phrases like information superhighway, right? But they wrote in their piece, Earn It would establish a national commission on online exploitation prevention. This commission would include the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and 12 other members that would be handpicked by leaders in Congress. The commission would be tasked with recommending best practices for providers, but it's way worse than that, folks, because as this EFF piece goes on to say, that it's more than just recommendations. These best practices that they come up with would bring the force of law, okay? So platforms that had failed to adhere to them would be stripped of their Section 230 protections. And, Joe, we're going to talk a little bit about Section 230 so that folks know what we're talking about, okay? And laws relating to restrictions on speech, they write, must reflect a careful balance of competing goals and protections for civil liberties. Lawmakers can only strike that balance through an open, transparent lawmaking process. They say it would be deeply irresponsible for Congress to offload that duty to a body of unelected and unaccountable commissioners, okay? But it gets worse, because if the Attorney General disagrees with the commission's recommendation, he has an override, and he can write his own instead. He has override authority. The bill simply gives too much power to the Department of Justice, which, as a law enforcement agency, is a particularly bad choice to dictate internet policy. Now, before we drill down into what all this bill does to cripple encryption that are used by millions of people to protect their data and their communications, Joe, let me ask you, you've looked at the text of the bill. As a constitutional attorney who knows what it is to read these bills and understand them, does it actually protect children?
Well, no, Mitch, it does not protect children. And here's a shocker. It was never designed to do that. This is simply the tactic that tyrants have taken since the beginning of government. They know that if they appeal to people saying this will protect children from online predators, who is going to say, no, I don't support that? No one. Because
right,
most
because
people
to
don't
say that I don't support that is to say I like child pornography. I think people ought to be able to exploit children. So you're given a choice there between two evils because of the way they packaged the bill.
Exactly. And that's the way they've done it from the beginning. And like I was saying about these classes that I teach, that's what I tell people. I'm like, look, you become so much smarter, well, apparently smarter, but maybe not truly. But when you know history and you can sit back and say, this exact same thing happened 2,000 years ago, and I can tell you about it, people's minds just blow, because it's always been, let's protect someone, right? And then you put your opponent in the place of having to say, like you said, well, I, for one, am in favor of child pornography, which, of course, you're not. But
right.
By that time, they put you in a box, and what are you going to say? Then you're forced to fight against what they're portraying to be something so noble and something so virtuous, when you know yourself, everything a tyrant does has the same ultimate goal, which is to destroy liberty. And that's what this does, plain and simple.
Exactly. You begin your article with a phrase that I just love. You refer to it as a bill with broad partisan support that is working its way through Congress. I've said this in a previous episode, but it's going to become one of those things that I will probably repeat often. I probably ought to have it put on a T-shirt. In America, we have the evil party and the stupid party. They occasionally get together and do something that is both evil and stupid, and this we call bipartisanship. So, when I hear of a bipartisan bill, I always get a little nervous. I actually like it when Democrats and Republicans don't agree on things. It's when they start agreeing that I realize, oh gosh, they've gotten together. The Cowboys and the Indians are ganging up on us, and we're about to be had. Right? The Bloods and the Crips are together on this one. So we're about to be taken for a ride.
And that's what, like when they tried to impeach Trump, they impeach him on these charges, but you sit there and say, on the stuff that's super unconstitutional, all of y'all agree on it. So of course you're not going to try to impeach him for some of the things that you all agree with. I mean, Democrats and Republicans join hands when we send a drone to blow up children. They're like, yay, we're taking care of the terrorists. But so the things that are really egregious, that are really horrendous, that are really destructive of individual liberty, those things have bipartisan support, which is why it drives me crazy to try and talk to people who are self-described conservatives, because they are nothing more than statists, because they expect government to provide an answer. And to say that, good grief, to say that someone like Lindsay Graham should be saying, we need to protect the children. I quoted him in my article. He said something like, we're not going to allow sex predators to have any sort of freedom at all. No, sir, period, or something like that. And I'm thinking, doesn't the Jeffrey Epstein thing, doesn't that reveal who the real sex predators are?
Well, yeah,
I mean, if we wanted to have,
but ignore the man behind the
children,
curtain. Ignore the man behind the curtain, Joe.
That's what I'm
Pay
saying.
no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Well, no, they can throw up their smoke screen and say, look, I'm out here being tough on these sex predators, while there's photos of all of them being chums with the sex predator who somehow suicided himself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Who commits suicide. But I mean, look at that, Mitch. That's the thing. They get to sit here and say, we will protect the children. We don't agree that there should be any of these predators online. Because they don't like the competition.
Exactly. And, you bring up an interesting point, and I've said this before, but it's going to be one of those things that I say again. There are a lot of principled issues that are matters of principled disagreement between conservatives and liberals, between Republicans and Democrats. This is not that. This is not a left versus right issue. This is an us versus them issue. I deliberately chose to call this show Enemy of the Surveillance State because by creating a surveillance state that treats all of us as criminals that warrant surveillance, and I use the word warrant there so loosely because they do it without anything resembling an honest-to-goodness constitutional warrant, okay? But by treating us that way, they have made themselves the enemies of the people. The surveillance state is an enemy of the people. So it is perfectly acceptable. It's not divisive or, I don't see myself as being like a radical at all to say I am an enemy of the surveillance state. And I think the listeners to this show would identify themselves as enemies of the surveillance state in varying degrees. We're all learning. I don't know everything, but I've spent about a decade studying this issue and learning everything I can, reading the experts on the subject, practicing the things that I can do. But my point in all of that is this issue, surveillance, encryption, privacy, these issues are not matters of left versus right or Republican versus Democrat. If only that were so. Because it really doesn't matter how any one of my listeners, if you're listening to this, I don't really care what you think about Donald Trump. I only ever mention him on this show peripherally, okay? So Donald Trump is what he is, but here's what he doesn't appear to get, okay? He wants to drain the swamp. He wants to do this. He wants to do that. Some of those things I would have a tremendous amount of respect for. But why in the world does he appoint a guy like State Attorney General, not State Attorney General, but Attorney General William Barr as Attorney General, right? William Barr is a dyed-in-the-wool surveillance hawk. And Joe, you mentioned Lindsay Graham. He's one of the sponsors of this bill, and we're going to talk a little bit about Lindsay Graham in just a moment. But right now, let's talk about William Barr. So TechCrunch did an article in July of 2019. The headline is, U.S. Attorney General William Barr says Americans should accept security risks of encryption backdoors. Let me explain for you who may not understand what a backdoor is. So you have a piece of encryption software on your computer that encrypts, say, your hard drive, or encrypts your emails, or encrypts packages or folders on your laptop or on your phone. A backdoor would be a way to just come in around that encryption. And they always talk about a backdoor that can only be used by the good guys. We'll have a warrant and we'll access that backdoor. That animal does not exist. If you break encryption, it's broken. And it's not just broken for the good guys to come in with a warrant. It's just broken. And so William Barr, here's what he said. In that article, they quote him as suggesting, quote, that the residual risk of vulnerability resulting from incorporating a lawful access mechanism, backdoor, is materially greater than those already in the unmodified product. In other words, he admits if we build a backdoor, we are weakening people's protections to protect information that really should be and is private to them. But then he says that risk is acceptable because, quote, we're talking about consumer products and services such as messaging, smartphones, emails, and voice and data applications, not talking about protecting the nation's nuclear launch codes. So let that sink in for a moment, folks. Their privacy matters. Your privacy, he just dismisses as, oh, it's just email and voice and data applications and messaging and smartphones and consumer products. This is the guy who would get to decide on your right to privacy under the Earn It Act. Because remember, he would have an override veto power, one ring to rule them all, and that ring would be on his undeserving finger. Not that there's any deserving finger anywhere for that kind of power. Let's not forget that Lord Acton said that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The tendency is gone. It is just a corrupting force, okay? So another point to keep in mind is that surveillance hawks use encryption to protect their communications. Now, this is more than just mere hypocrisy, folks. It's too similar to the way the same politicians who would deprive citizens of the right to keep and bear arms surround themselves with armed guards, police, and military personnel. The message is really clear with both guns and encrypted communications. This is for us. This is for us ascended beings, us philosopher kings, not for you mere mortals, okay? So there's the bill, like we said, you were talking about, Joe, you were talking about Lindsay Graham, right? So he's one of the sponsors of the bill. And, you know, just spend a moment for a second here and let's talk about Lindsay Graham.
Well, it's funny you made, you made the connection, the Lord of the Rings connection there, because I consider William Barr to be the Grima Wormtongue of this administration. He's sitting there whispering to the king, in this case, the president, all of these things that he should understand, that he should believe, and all of these threats. And I think Donald Trump, probably left to his own devices, is a much more libertarian guy than he is allowed to be sitting where he sits. But William Barr, I have no respect for him. Don't give me the respect the office, because I certainly don't. Because what this guy has done, not only has he always called for this back door, like you quoted him perfectly. He's like, Americans should just accept it because it's for their safety. Well, William Barr is also the guy who a few months ago in Memphis announced this thing where they're going to start, you know, the red flags are not only going to be for people that have had trouble, but the words he used were anyone that we think someday would mobilize toward violence, we are going to take their weapons away.
I'm glad you bring that up, Joe. Joe, let me just, I am glad you bring that up, because in a previous episode, the very first episode of this show, and if you've not heard it, folks, go back and grab it. It's called Why Surveillance Matters, Even If You Have Nothing to Hide. And what I lay out in there is how by building a dossier on you, while of course James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence, famously lied under oath on camera with a microphone in his face and said, no, we're not doing that. Just bald-faced lie, and then had to dial it back and kind of back off of that. And in an interview said that he was asked a question to which there's not a simple yes or no answer, so I gave the least dishonest answer I could. Least dishonest. Okay, he only lied a smidge, folks. Let's cut him a break. I mean, it's only perjury. You'd go to prison for that, right? But not him. Okay, so in that episode, what I lay out in very clear terms with quotes from Ed Snowden. In fact, there's a nice video clip or an audio clip in there from Ed Snowden talking about this. They are able to create a dossier on you that predicts your future behavior. Okay, so that may sound a little crazy to you. If it does, listen to the episode. Listen to the evidence of that episode and see if it still sounds crazy to you. So when Barr says, if we ever think you might be a problem, I mean, this is enemy of the state stuff, and no pun intended there with the name of my show being enemy of the surveillance state, but this is that. This is predicting crimes ahead of time and acting on what they know about you and who you're going to be when circumstances, because they already know what their plan is, right? They already know what's coming down the pike. If they've been surveilling you long enough to build a good dossier on you, they know what your reaction to that's going to be. So you may not deserve to be on the list right now, but you'll deserve to be on the list a year from now, so you're already on the list.
And there's a couple of things, Mitch, that people miss all the time with these surveillance things. You know, someone will say, and typically this is what we hear, well, if you haven't done anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. And this is what I always answer those people with. I'm not interested in if you've done anything wrong. I'm sure you haven't. But I'm going to ask you this. If the whole world, anybody you love, anybody that respects you, were to receive in the mail a printed out copy of your incomplete, unedited web browsing history, would there be anything in that would cause you trouble in your life?
Yeah, I love that. I take it a
Don't
slightly.
worry about.
Yeah, don't worry about whether you have anything to hide.
Yeah, don't worry about what you have. Think about, do you have something to be embarrassed about?
Or the way I ask it, Joe, what do you have that's worth protecting? It's not about what you have to hide. It's always about what you have that's worth protecting.
Right. And my thing is, I'm a Christian, so I believe that, people make mistakes and you can repent and be forgiven and all that. But the government, they don't see that. They see, look here, I'm going to pull up Joe Wolverton's file. 10 years ago, Joe was surfing around the internet and looked at this stuff. Now, Joe, in 2020, I repented of that 10 years ago and haven't returned to doing those things. The government doesn't care, and I don't go around telling people about it. So they send this information, and so this is what I'm saying. They've got you, right? They can literally, that monstrosity at the point of the mountain in Utah, they literally have every electronic communication you've ever made saved and ready, so that if you don't pass Barr's muster, if he thinks that you're mobilizing toward opposing the regime, they will kick out that file on you in a heartbeat, and you will be impotent to fight against this sort of thing, because you will be fighting a war in your home to explain behavior that no longer is part of who you are.
Exactly. And worse than that, what the Vault 7 CIA dump from WikiLeaks shows is that they have the ability to fake your internet browsing history and to insert things into your hard drive. They have the ability to install things, drop files and folders onto your hard drive that you would never know were there, and then serve a warrant and find those things. So, in fact, there were.
Exactly
So we're talking about child pornography here because that's what Lindsay Graham's talking about, and that's what Barr's talking about, and that's what Blumenthal's talking about while they try to strip our right to communicate privately. Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about the half a dozen child pornography cases that were thrown out of court in the weeks right after that Vault 7 dump by WikiLeaks, because smart attorneys asked the question, is this possible? And the federal government, rather than answering that question as to whether that was true, simply dropped those cases.
Yeah, dropped the case.
So I have no doubt in my mind that that's a half a dozen child pornographers, consumers of child pornography. Let me be clear. These weren't guys taking the photos themselves, okay? But they're consuming that. They're on they're the buyer without which there can't be a seller. So these are the second lowest people on the planet, and they're still walking the planet free because the federal government had to drop the case rather than admit, yeah, actually we could absolutely have planted that information and not left a trail. So that's a reality. But getting back real quickly to Lindsey Graham, America's favorite Demopublican, who is the sponsor of this bill and is himself a surveillance hawk and enemy of privacy. Here's a sound clip from his appearance in 2015 on Fox News during a time when he fooled himself into thinking he was presidential material. Of course, the reality is that Slick Rick from Texas, Rick Perry, stood a better chance of getting the nomination than Lindsey Graham did. Lindsey Graham didn't get within sight of the nomination before he realized he was way out of his depth. But here's what he said when he appeared on Fox News Live in 2015 about the NSA. Now, this is important. This was at a time when this is post-Snowden, so we already knew, we'd already seen the documents about the NSA illegally spying on U.S. citizens. Here's what he had to say about him after that.
The NSA employees are patriots as far as I'm concerned. I'm for oversight of the government, but the people out there trying to protect us are not the enemy. I'm not worried about the NSA. I'm worried about ISIL penetrating this country and killing a lot of us.
So I'm worried about ISIL penetrating this country and killing a lot of us. So the rapper he was using then was, we've got to fight those terrorists, right? Like, we got to fight those terrorists. And now, of course, flash forward, however many years, that was 2015. Here we are, 2020. So 5 years later, he's introducing legislation to basically make it a breeze for them to do what they're doing, just to continue unabated and increase the surveillance at an exponential rate. But this time the wrapping is, we've got to do something to save the children. So the co-sponsor of the bill, the co-sponsor of that bill, of that act, is Democrat Senator from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal. So in 2007, Blumenthal was on the right side of this issue when George H.W. Bush was increasing the surveillance state and kind of bringing it out into the light with the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act and all of that. And all of this NSA surveillance apparatus was really being added on to the point that we're where we are now. Blumenthal actually fought to have an exemption for telecommunication companies that cooperate with the surveillance state to be stripped out of a package that George W. Bush was pushing. It passed anyway in 2008. Congress passed it. They passed it over Blumenthal's objection. So in 2007, 2008, Blumenthal was on the right side of this issue, but the prevailing winds are in a different direction now. And so the guy who was not an outright surveillance hawk is in 2020 an outright surveillance hawk. So besides,
well, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that the principles don't play a part in this. It was never about
they
principles.
Have no, they have no. It's like this thing which I tell people, like character. The word we use, character. You know how that's defined. You define someone's character. Well, that comes from a Greek word, charax, which means a stick driven into the ground. And the way that we have developed that in English, it means here are these stakes that you've put in the ground, and you will never go beyond them, right? That's your
They
charax.
define your boundaries.
Right. Those are your boundaries. These people have no boundaries. They literally have no character.
No, it's about what I said, the prevailing winds. So at the time, Blumenthal was up against George W. Bush, who was a Republican, so he was on the away team or the home team, depending on how you look at it, right? But the other team, right? He was on the other team. So he was pushing for this legislation, and Blumenthal was against it. One is left to wonder what would have happened if Bill Clinton were still in the White House on September 11th, 2001, when that day happened, and then there was a Department of Homeland Security and a Patriot Act and all of these other things and the surveillance state coming out into the light. Where would Blumenthal have fallen? I can't know that. I don't know the man. I don't know his heart. I don't know who he was in 2007-8. I don't know who he is really in 2020. But the point is, if his principles were against it, they ought to still be against it. It's not as if anything has come along that ought to change someone's mind, other than perhaps the Snowden revelations, which demonstrate to us that these people make their own rules and break the law to surveil all of us. So let's go ahead.
Lindsay Graham with Snowden. I remember writing an article years ago, right after Snowden first went on the run, and Lindsey Graham said, "I view Mr. Snowden's action not as one of patriotism, but potentially a felony. I hope we follow Mr. Snowden to the ends of the earth and bring him to justice."
And I still have people ask me, well, if he's such a patriot, why is he still in Russia? Because if he comes back here, he's going to stop a bullet or stretch a rope. That's why.
Oh, yeah, he's not free to come. And you think about that. We have elected congressmen who, Mitch, think about this, man. Every single one of them placed their hands on a Bible and swore to God.
Or a Quran. Let's be fair. Or a Quran.
To their God.
No, I get what you're saying. I was just trying to be cute.
And no, I got you. But the point is, they knew when they think about who we have in government, those men knew that when they made their oath to God to be bound by the Constitution, that they were lying.
That's right. And this bill
they don't. We like to pretend that they are just good people who don't understand the issues. No, that's not it. The sooner we realize that these people are not good people who are misunderstood or misled, the quicker we get to all coming behind a solution to this.
Absolutely. And this bill really demonstrates how they lie, because the whole wrapping, the presentation, the sizzle behind this bill, the sizzle of this bill's stake, is to protect the children. We have to protect the children. But there's nothing in the bill. I've read the bill. Okay. Now, as a layman, I've read the bill. There's nothing in the bill that actually prevents anything about child exploitation or does anything to protect children. But it will break encryption because it will force companies like Signal, companies like Proton Mail, if they operate in the United States. And I'm going to reach out to both of them and try to get a statement from both Signal and Proton Mail just as a sampling. It will force them to break their encryption. It will. So there was a great. I use the Linux operating system on everything that I use because Linux is an open source software, an open source operating system that I can audit the code if I want to. Millions of other people have already audited the code. There's nothing in there to spy on us. But the guy behind the Linux operating system since the late 80s or early 90s is a guy named Linus Torvalds, who is from Helsinki. And his father served a couple of terms as a member of parliament for the European Union. And he was asked once in a news conference whether his son had ever been pressured by the U.S. government to insert a backdoor into the encryption of the Linux operating system. Now, again, some of you may know about these gag orders that the FISA court places when you get this demand or this request for this or that, right? And you're forbidden to discuss it. So his father's answer to the question was, no, of course not. But while he's saying that, he's shaking his head up and down at the camera saying, yes, he has been pressured. He's just never done it. And we can know he's never done it. We can know that Mark Shuttleworth at Ubuntu, which is a derivative of Linux, it's a Linux distribution. It's the one I use. There, I said it. I use Ubuntu. So let the distro wars start amongst all my Linux nerd friends that listen to this. But we can know that they don't, whether we know them and trust them or not, because the source code is open, right? But what we don't have is an open source government. What we have is a proprietary source code government that hides everything they're doing, including the real intent of a bill, behind this BS, fuzzy, warm-sounding name and this promise about protecting children. Well, Lindsay Graham doesn't give a rat's backside about protecting children. He outed himself in 2015. He's outed himself several times since then about his position on encryption and private communications. It's for him. It's not for you. So this bill, if it makes it all the way through Congress and gets signed off on by a president that doesn't understand the nature of what's going on around him sometimes, it will become the law. And encryption as we know it today, the internet as we know it today, will be broken because, folks, it's not just encryption. This is also a free speech issue. What you referred to, by the way, Joe, in your article as the chilling effect. Can you spend a few seconds talking about Section 230 and what you called the chilling effect of this bill?
Right. So Section 230 basically says this. It says that if someone posts something online that's criminal, then that person is held responsible for that. If you post child pornography, then the person who uploaded the child pornography is held liable rather than the internet company or the communication company or the people who own the website. None of those people will be held liable for the actions of another person.
Okay, so let me just
fundamental aspect of Anglo-American law.
So let me just chew that up a little bit. Let me digest that just a smidge. So Joe Schmo posts something illegal, plans to overthrow the government, child pornography, surveillance pictures that he's taken of his ex-girlfriend, whatever. He posts that on Twitter. We'll just pick on Twitter, okay? He posts that on Twitter. So Section 230 protects Twitter, but would hold Joe Schmo accountable for his own actions because Twitter is not a publisher. That guy is the publisher. Twitter is just a platform that guy is using to publish his materials that are illegal, correct?
Exactly. I'll draw the easy analogy. Holding Twitter responsible, in your example, holding Twitter responsible for this guy putting up the plans to, blow up the White House or something. Holding Twitter responsible, that's like saying that Winchester, the ammo manufacturer, is guilty if I use one of their bullets to murder someone. Now, no one.
There are people that would say that.
Oh, no, that's my point. That's exactly my point. There are those people who say, well, you know, Winchester should be held accountable because they made this thing that made it possible for you to do. That's so nonsensical. But
yeah, because at what point do then we take Louisville Slugger to task,
right?
Because somebody beat somebody to death with a baseball bat, or Ford because somebody ran over somebody with a car, or keep filling in the blanks. You know, I hit you in the head with a brick. Good luck figuring out who made that brick.
But why don't we?
Because it's retarded.
If you're saying, well, no, but why doesn't the government do it? Because they do what they know they can get away with.
Exactly.
And
exactly. And they know they can attack
people,
encryption in the name of protecting children. They know they can attack free speech in the name of protecting children. But so what did you mean by chilling effect, though?
Okay, the chilling effect that I describe is something that lawyers talk about with regard to the First Amendment. What it means is that if this becomes the law, and law in giant air quotes, right? But if this becomes the law, then people are going to start self-censoring, and the companies that have these platforms for you, they're going to stop. They're going to err on the side of obedience to this law and prevent certain people from publishing anything. Now we're talking I'll just use the New American. They could easily look at the New American and say, you know, I read something Joe said, that sounds incendiary to me. And they, fine the New American, let's just say for the sake of discussion. Well, the New American's going to be like, we like you, Joe, but we don't like you to the tune of being fined for putting your stuff. So they take me up. Well, pretty soon the New American gets to the point where they can't publish anything and they're gone. And how did they get destroyed? Simply because of the chilling effect. They were afraid. It froze their will. They were like, oh, I can't do this because I'm liable to get in trouble. So you see all of these people that provide this wonderful platform that is the internet, where we can have shows like yours, where we can have YouTube shows like
yours.
Mine.
That's right.
Yeah. But with the chilling effect, that is to say, it will freeze these people and think, oh, I don't want to go foul of this. So instead of having to give a back door because of what things Joe said or Mitch said, I'm just going to close it down. And so then you have the situation where without prosecuting a single violation, they have shut down the very people they intended to shut down. All under the name of a simple backdoor to the encryption and protecting children. And no one can say anything about it because they will have taken that. They would have taken down the people they targeted without firing a shot.
So it's the Sedition Act and so it was the Alien Act and the Sedition Act that caused so much trouble in Adams' presidency. Yeah. So we'd be looking at that all over again.
There they actually prosecute. The Adams administration actually prosecuted people. In this case, the chilling effect, if this becomes the law, you will see it so powerfully chill these these platform owners, that you will see the very people that Barr is targeting will be the very people who are silenced, and they'll never prosecute a single case.
They won't have to. We will self censor, and the platforms will censor us, and I'll just get deplatformed, and then. Folks, you'll want to listen to episode 37 of Enemy of the Surveillance State, and there won't be an episode 37 if that happens, because there's no way a show like this makes it through that hurdle. Okay, I'm exposing the underbelly of the deep state in the surveillance state and telling people what they can do to get around that and practice the freedom that God gave them and that the Constitution protects for them. And there's no way if they pass an unconstitutional law like this that really is an affront on both the Fourth Amendment protection against illegal search and seizure, and the First Amendment protection of free speech, there's no way, if they can pass that, that a show like Enemy of the Surveillance State makes it to the bathroom.
No, and imagine what they say. They say, well, if your child was the one that was saved from being groomed and kidnapped and sold into slavery and forced into child pornography, isn't it worth occasionally shutting down shows that maybe aren't so bad right now, but could be misunderstood by bad people? If it's saving your child, isn't it worth those mistakes? And Lottie-Dottie and everybody is going to say, yes, it's worth it. Yeah. Because they don't show you the other side.
Exactly.
What if we could really protect children by educating people? By showing
exactly. Educating people about their own personal responsibility,
there you go,
and their own dignity as human persons, and the dignity of other people as human persons. So, since this whole conversation has kind of danced around the periphery of pornography and child pornography and everything, let me say this. Today, I hate social media. I hate Facebook. I'm on Facebook because I had to go behind enemy lines to reach people where they are, and that's where people are. So there's a little bit of apparent hypocrisy in a guy who has a podcast teaching people how to protect their privacy, having a Facebook account where he posts his episodes and says, hey guys, go check out Enemy of the Surveillance State, and be sure to subscribe while you're there so you never miss an episode. And I'm doing all that on Facebook, so it appears to be a little hypocritical. But my answer to that is, hey, if you weren't on Facebook, I wouldn't have to be on Facebook. I have to go where the vast majority of people are, and everybody and his sister is on Facebook. So today on Facebook, I finally got my belly full, right? And I put up a post that essentially says, look, if your way of viewing women is as sexual objects, and that shows itself in either your timeline or your stories, save me the trouble of unfriending you and go ahead and unfriend me, because I don't want to know you. I'll pray for you, but we got to part company. I like, it really comes down to that, because here's the deal, and I plan to do an episode in the future on the connection between surveillance and pornography, because the vast majority of the servers dishing out porn anywhere in the world are in, say it with me, Russia. Okay, so go ahead and swallow that jagged little pill while you're browsing your porn next time, and then stop it, because you can't care about the dignity of human persons and see privacy as a right, and at the same time think that certain persons are objects for you to enjoy and that they don't matter as people. Everybody has that same human dignity, and you either respect existence or expect resistance. That's just how it is. Okay, so I think probably, let me say this. Okay, Enemy of the Surveillance State is, this is a labor of love for me. I launched this because I really do care about privacy. Do I know that someone could listen to my show? Do I suspect, I should put it that way, do I suspect that someone could listen to my show and learn enough stuff to do something bad on the internet? Sure. But I've got confidence that most of the people that are listening to my show are decent, normal human beings that just feel like I feel. If I wanted the NSA to read that email, I would have copied them on it, Joe. It is a violation of my God-given right of privacy protected by the Fourth Amendment for them to surveil me. I don't deserve their surveillance. They don't have a warrant to surveil me. I am not a specific target of their surveillance. There are no specific targets. They just throw a great big net.
Well, and this is the thing that gets me, Mitch, is like, this is what I tell the people that I talk to all the time, is I say, tyrant's going to tyrant. That's what they do. Tyrants are going to take your liberty, because that's what tyrants have done since, Athens.
Since forever. That's right.
My problem is this. My problem isn't with Bill Barr, because Bill Barr is a tyrant and always has been. My problem is this. When you have all of us at the airport and everyone standing there is having the rights protected by the Fourth Amendment being violated by government, if you were to stand up and say, hey, why don't you read the Constitution? You can't do this to me. Do you know what all those other people would do in line? They would roll their eyes and say, dude, just shut up.
Shut up and don't slow the line down, man.
Let's just get through this, man. Shut up.
That's
my problem.
I'll give you a great example of that. So a few years ago, before I went on staff with the parent company of the New American Magazine, the John Birch Society, I was going to be flying out from the East Coast out to Texas because that's where they wanted me. So my wife and I flew out there for our look-see and, find a house, get everything all ironed out and everything so I could move out there a few weeks later and start the job. So we fly out there and we're getting ready to fly back. I'm at DFW Airport. And, of course, they've got us all standing there with our belts off and our shoes off. And, then there was the whole underwear bomber thing, and I got really, really nervous. I didn't know what was coming next. And now I know what's next. It's the naked scanning machines and the groping TSA employees. So we're standing there in line, and the line beside us is an entire flight crew going through that same security. And the guy in front of me turns to me and says, "Man, I'm glad to see they make them do the same thing." And I said, "Really?" He said, Yeah, we're all in this together. And I said, "That's a dog and pony show for your benefit so that you will feel the way you feel right now." "Oh, why do you say that?" I said, "You see that guy at the front of the line with all the stripes on the sleeve of his jacket?" "Yeah, that's the pilot. Once he makes it through that line, they're going to give him the keys to the plane. He doesn't have to hijack it. If they've not already vetted every one of those people, we need to be having an entirely different conversation. They're not actually going through security. They're being seen going through security. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. We've been taken for a ride, but again, it's all packaged either as, say it with me, folks, we've got to fight those terrorists or we've got to do something to save the children. Enemy of the Surveillance State is hosted and produced by me, C. Mitchell Shaw. Original music for the show was produced by Mike Levitt. There's a link in the show notes. If you've got anything coming up that you need to own your own music for, you want a special song for your wedding or anything for this, I really like the song he created for me, that Enemy of the Surveillance State theme song. So if you're interested in having a song made, there's a link in the show notes where you can reach out to Mike Levitt yourself and find out what he can do for you. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and check the show notes for ways to support the show on Patreon and by purchasing Enemy of the Surveillance State merchandise. So, Joe, man, thanks for being on today. I think the best closing quote for today's episode for this show is the very last sentence in your article, because it segues real nicely to what you just said about how tyrants are going to tyrant, right? You end that article with this quote: "Once it develops in the body politic, the muscle of tyranny never atrophies." Joe, thanks for being on the show, man. This has been a blast. Thanks for listening to Enemy of the Surveillance State, and we'll see you next week.